My father, who grew up in Drummondville, used to say, "Dépêche-toi." So since we're last, I'll hurry up. How do I advance? This way? Click. This isn't working. That one, thank you. Okay. So my colleague, Jess Levine, and I are going to talk about two things. A study that we did looking at climate change past and present in the Lake Champlain, downscaled to the Lake Champlain Basin, which was the first time ever. And then some thoughts we have about how infrastructure, using the example of culverts, can be more resilient. So our study was done 2 years ago, before many of these problems started to happen. And we had an actual lake scientist, a lake climate scientist, working on our behalf, Dr. Kurt Steger from Paul Smith's College. This report is available from nature.org/Vermont if you would like to download it. And we looked at past climate using 8 long-term weather stations that are distributed around the basin. We looked at trends for temperature and precipitation. Then we used a new modeling tool called Climate Wizard, which is also available for download and playing with, to model predictions for temperature and precipitation going out to the end of this century. What do we find? Many things. I'm giving you the smallest nutshell. Over the past century, our temperature throughout the Champlain Basin has warmed, but it's warmed the fastest in about the last 30 years, starting from, say, the mid-70s, where we had an average annual warming of 2.1 degrees Fahrenheit. And there was a seasonality to that warming. More warming happened during the fall and winter. And over that last 30 or so year period, precipitation increased an average of 3 inches annually compared to the 50 years prior to that. And please remember that, I'll refer to it again, but that 3-inch average annual jump, which has held in the years since, translated to about a 1 foot higher average annual level of Lake Champlain. Looking ahead through to the end of this century, our study predicts a steady increase in temperature by anywhere from 1 to 11 degrees Fahrenheit. And that range is trying to bracket the full potential of emission scenarios, whether we travel along on a low emission scenario globally or a high emission scenario. In that same time period, annual average precipitation is predicted to increase by 4 to 6 inches annually, again, depending on the emission scenarios. And there'll be some patterns we could start to predict. More heavy storms are likely, more severe storms, but paired with that, also the likelihood of longer and more severe summer droughts. We're predicted to have less snow in the winter and more rain happening during the winter. Our modeling, our predictions, agrees with that of others, including the Union of Concerned Scientists, who have produced this graphic that I think is very easy to get in a nutshell. They have a graphic like this for all the states of the Northeast. Here's the Vermont example. And where you see Vermont marching south, down the East Coast, it's giving you the prediction for what Vermont's climate will look like as we go forward through the century. So by the mid-century, we may look like Pennsylvania or eastern Ohio, depending on what emissions pathway we travel along. And by the end of the century, we could be Our climate could be anywhere like eastern Ohio to northern Georgia under a high emission scenario. And that range of temperature agrees with the 1 to 11 degree Fahrenheit that we've predicted in our report. So things will likely change, and just wanted to think about what that might look like for the lake. Again, with that predicted increase in precipitation of 4 to 6 inches annually, that could translate to a 1 to 2 foot average annual lake stage rise above the increase that we've had already. We will certainly have less ice cover, and we're seeing that already. There's a diminishment of ice cover, and that will result in more wave action in the winter, leading to erosion problems, as my colleagues have been talking about. The lake water temperature will likely increase, and one of the consequences of that will be a shrinking area of cold water for the species that depend on cold water, like lake trout. And then, as a consequence of a number of these changing climate parameters, we're likely to have increased nutrient loading and more frequent algal blooms. If we think about how this might affect our rivers, we're likely to have earlier ice out and possibly more ice jams, more winter flooding due to more rain happening in the winter than snow, and rain falling on frozen ground, more severe summer storms, which can lead to greater bank erosion, sedimentation turbidity, algal blooms, that sort of thing. And the more summer droughts will lead to increasing river water temperature, lower oxygen, less opportunity for cold water fish like brook trout to have the habitat they need. So how can we think about this in terms of creating greater resiliency to these predicted changes? And my colleague, Jess Levine, is going to talk about that.
So we've talked a lot today about the events of 2011, Tropical Storm Irene, and also the spring flooding. And those are powerful examples of how we may not necessarily and probably are not prepared for some of the changes likely to occur. Couple quick numbers. We've heard a lot of statistics today, but just from Tropical Storm Irene, FEMA has already committed $200 million for New York and $100 million for Vermont. And that's just the federal commitment for fixing what was broken from that one event. So how do we position ourselves for a changing climate, for future storms? A key lesson from the climate change report that TNC put out is that infrastructure needs to be able to withstand some of these conditions that include increased flooding and washouts, increased erosion, and longer periods of intense heat. Infrastructure can help us to adapt. Better infrastructure can help us adapt to a changing climate and improve our resilience. And I don't know if we've defined resilience, but this is a definition I quite like from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the ability of a system and its parts to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazardous event in a timely and efficient manner. So if we think about our infrastructure, our built environment, and how we repair it after it's damaged and how we build it as we're building it, we can improve our resilience to future floods that may come along next year and to a changing climate over the longer term. And I think we want to think about resilience both in terms of the human system, the built system, and our communities, and also our natural systems. So culverts are one part of infrastructure. I want to really preface the next few slides with that we know that we recognize that there are many parts of infrastructure. We've chosen to to tackle culverts, which are a part of our transportation infrastructure, because we think that they can provide some good lessons for us as we look ahead and try to improve our resilience overall. So we believe that, and our work is showing us that well-designed culverts can simultaneously improve the safety of communities, the health of our aquatic ecosystems, and our resilience, and that in the long term, they can be economically sustainable. And we need to think of long-term, both long-term economics and also long-term climate. So very simplistic view of what a culvert is. A culvert is a place where a road crosses over a stream, and culverts can either allow the stream to continue its natural path or alter it significantly. If a culvert acts as a barrier, for example, for the movement of sediment and for organisms that live in the stream, the whole system is disrupted and compromised. And we've been talking, I want to keep thinking about resilience, or short-term resilience, long-term resilience, and culverts as an example of that. In the short term, culverts that are well-designed enable, we'll talk about fish for a moment since they're in this slide, enable those fish to move about the stream to meet their life cycle needs within their lifespan. In the long term, adapting to climate change, culverts that are well-designed allow populations to move through a system to, again, to meet their needs as the system itself is changing. Culverts are, of course, also an important part of human systems. They allow roads to cross streams, and they allow us to get where we need to go. They allow the road infrastructure to function, connecting people to their jobs, their schools, each other, emergency services. And when a culvert fails or a bridge fails, as we saw in Irene, critical infrastructure is impacted. Roads are closed, people can't get to their emergency services. And with the higher flows we expect to see in coming years, culverts are more likely to wash out and cause local flooding. So we can expect, if climate predictions are accurate, we can definitely expect to see more and more culverts failing, as we saw last year. Okay, I just want to mention, in case this is new ground for some of you, that not all culverts are the same. I mentioned this earlier. In the top left is a culvert that's too small, it's perched, organisms can't move through that system, and as you go down along towards the bottom, you get better and better stream crossings. Culverts that simulate the natural stream crossing are better from an aquatic ecosystem perspective. They're larger, they're more like the stream, they're mimicking the natural channels. They effectively move the water, the sediment, and they allow organisms that depend on that system, that live in that system, to move. So what happens when culverts are too small? Well, we saw this. We saw properties, roads, businesses damaged, millions of dollars spent on repairs, frequent maintenance, even in non-storm events. We hear over and over from local highway people that the undersized culverts are a real burden for them. They're constantly clearing them out. We see road closures, which is a safety issue, traffic delays, and then the costs of when those culverts actually fail are much, much higher to be repaired than was it planned work. So as I said, we're tackling culverts as one example of a way to promote climate and flood resilient infrastructure. And we're working with partners, including Tim's group at SUNY Plattsburgh, and many others, watershed associations, to identify priority culverts in 5 different Champlain Basin watersheds, 4 in Vermont, 1 in New York. And we're looking at the priorities primarily from an ecological perspective. What are the criterion? What are the priority culverts to be replaced to improve the aquatic system health? But we're also working in places when we can to identify community priorities, by talking with local departments of public works, local town and county highway supervisors, to look for the synergies. Where are the places that culverts are impeding the health of the aquatic system and also constantly flooding and causing thousands, millions of dollars in damage to the roads, safety, road closures, safety concerns. And a final stage of this work will be to do outreach with towns and also with town, county, state departments of public works, highway supervisors, to share what we've learned. And this work, I should mention, is supported by a number of organizations. The Lake Champlain Basin Program is one of the strongest supporters of the work we've been doing. So we're also, in addition to trying to identify where these culverts are, we're also, by working on the ground, we're discovering why they're there and why they're not getting upgraded, and starting to look at those barriers. And one of those, obviously, is cost. Improving infrastructure has a high initial cost, but we're gathering the information to make the case that in the long term, the cost may actually be lower to having the cost of having resilient infrastructure that will withstand these higher flows. Of course, towns, counties, departments of transportation all have shrinking budgets, can scarcely maintain what they have, so we're really looking for creative financing solutions for some of this work as well. We're working on policy from the local level. We've heard about town codes and standards. We've talked today about hazard mitigation planning, and so we're looking for all these opportunities to ensure that resilient infrastructure is incorporated into policy. And we're also working at the federal level to think about creative policies and financing mechanisms for some of this work. And then, of course, there's not a lot of awareness about the potential benefits. So we're doing a lot of outreach primarily at a very local level about how improved culverts can save towns money, can save counties money, has fish and wildlife benefits, and as Tim mentioned, recreational benefits if these are places where people are coming to fish, tourism benefits, economic benefits, and then of course safety and resilience. And finally, we're learning from experience in other watersheds in other parts of the country where this kind of work is being done to improve resilience to floods and adapt to climate change. So this is my final slide. To move this work forward, we're focusing on identifying opportunities for communities that offer benefits now and lay the foundation for addressing projected changes. And in a recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report talks about these as low regrets measures. These are things we can do now, they help us now, and they prepare us better for the future. And as we move forward with this, we're encouraging planning and policy changes at many different scales, from the local, state to the federal, to encourage more resilient infrastructure. One of the big information gaps that we're facing is in the Champlain Basin. We have this this climate change model that was done on the basin scale, but we don't have a fine-scale hydrology model, and we think this would be really useful to help identify the most vulnerable infrastructure and communities, not just for this culvert work, but thinking about climate change and promoting resilience. It's a big piece of information that we think is a hole to be filled, a gap to be filled. I want to conclude by reiterating that culverts are really one part of resilient infrastructure, but we think they're a place that a lot of progress can be made now and with a changing climate. The vision is much larger. The vision is for healthy, resilient aquatic communities coexisting alongside safe, thriving, resilient human communities. And we believe infrastructure improvements can help achieve this. They can be good for ecosystems, biodiversity, and also for human communities that live alongside those rivers, and they can be cost effective. So thank you very much. As we're wrapping up this evening, we also want to thank the Basin Program for the opportunity to present at this meeting and for providing this forum for the public. So thanks.